Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for being here as we come together to celebrate the life of our dear Bernie Ronan. So I want to say thank you to all of you who are here to show your support for the family. And then say thank you to Maya and the family for loaning Bernie to us for so many years and sharing all that he was with all of us. I think everyone knows that Bernie was a very special person who dedicated his life to the right things and the values of the Maricopa system, social justice and democracy, and always making sure that we knew that students come first, because that is the business, that's what we do. And he will be missed, but the work he did will not be missed, because that work will continue for many years. And so we have a short program today, and there are others that will speak, but I wanted to, I guess I should have introduced myself. I'm making eye contact with Maya, she knows me. So I am Maria Harper-Mernick. I am the interim chancellor for the Maricopa Community College system, and I had the honor and privilege of working with Bernie for many years when he was at the district office. So I am going to share a quote that a version of this quote has been attributed to Emerson, but apparently he never said that. So this is something Bernie would know, by the way. So I try to be very specific because I know he's listening to what I'm saying. I believe that most of it was written by a lady from Kansas named Bessie Stanley. But I want to read that quote because I think it embodies what I think of Bernie. The Bernie I knew before I went to the Mass, and the Bernie I now know because I went to the Mass and I heard what all of you had to say about him. So the quote is, "He has achieved success who has lived well, laughed often, and loved much, who has enjoyed the trust and the respect of intelligent women and men, and the love of children, who has filled his niche and accomplished his task, who has left the world better than he found it, whether an improved puppy, a perfect poem, or a rescued soul, who has always looked for the best in others and given them the best he had, who appreciated beauty, whose life was an inspiration, and whose memory is a benediction." So thank you for allowing us to do a celebration today for Bernie, Maya, and family. And it is my pleasure to introduce now Diana Villanueva Salcedo, who will lead us through the program.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're here to celebrate Bernie's life. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
As we shared from work news of Bernie's passing with so many colleagues and friends throughout the valley, throughout the state, and indeed throughout the nation, people were quick to share memories, but even more than that, people were quick to share images of Bernie. Bernie at the front of the room facilitating was one of the most often mentioned, or next to an ever-present and very scribbled upon flip chart that we had to go back and decipher later at the office because we weren't quite sure what he meant. Certainly his work in the civic space and all he had done to promote civic engagement is another often cited remembrance. But for anyone who was ever in Bernie's office, books was the overriding image. Certainly for me, who first worked with Bernie on a community project nearly 15 years ago, then later as an employee, Bernie reading is my enduring image. Whether at his desk with his sandwich and a little baggie of carrots, happily munching away with a book in his lap, or even better, at a corner table at Los Picos restaurant here in Mesa, which was his favorite, an open book next to a bowl of steaming albondigas with a side of tortillas, and seemingly oblivious to the hustle and bustle and shouts of the cooks and waitresses, of course all yelling in Spanish, music blaring in the black background, and there he was, just very intent, sipping his soup and reading his book. So Bernie and books are tied together in many minds, and certainly in mine. So it's an honor to take you on a journey, his family and intimate circle of friends, revisiting Bernie's bookshelf, if you will, his work at Maricopa, in our communities, and certainly the impact he's had on many of us. So from Bernie's work family and community family to his home family, we're honored to have you here, to hear us as we share our thoughts on your husband, your dad, your sibling, your cuñado. For some, it might seem strange that the first book on this virtual shelf is a work from Pope Francis. An encyclical from the Vatican isn't always the first tome that comes to mind when thinking about community colleges, public policy, or even Mesa, for that matter, where we know Bernie spent so much years of his policy work. And that's why I'm ever grateful that we're able to hold this celebration for him here. I think this place had a very special place for him, and I know this community certainly did. Yet I truly believe that Bernie's work in public policy was clearly rooted in his faith. There's a particular chapter in this encyclical about the church going forth into the world, as Pope Francis would say. And I think that's exactly what Bernie did. He went out into this public policy world armed with faith and intellect, and oftentimes humor. So please don't take me wrong, he was never preachy by any means, and to the contrary, he had this very devilish grin. And I think many of you know what I'm talking about. It was almost like his own little personal early warning system that this little comment or zinger's coming your way, and sometimes it was just an utterly inappropriate but ever so funny comment. It's like you knew it was coming. So no, definitely not preachy. I wouldn't call him preachy at all. But neither did he need to be. He carried himself in this public policy arena that frankly is fraught with politics that don't always value our students, don't always value our community, and certainly our minority communities, or the hard choices to make our world more fair and more just. Yet he was always armed with a clear sense of social justice and the need to better the common good. That is a stand rich in faith, not dogma, but faith. And this is where our paths first crossed, working together on the very first ever Mesa Latino Town Hall. Carmen was an intern for us during that year. Many in our community here in Mesa thought that this was really a radical thought, to say the least, a community that many on the outside see as quite conservative, and this was on the heels of elections that made front page news. He pressed for the college to take part in an event that would bring together Latinos in Mesa, along with those in positions of leadership, to dialogue about what the community's concerns were and how to effectively address them. Constructive dialogue, certainly rooted in democracy and engagement, which represents so much of Bernie's work that we'll hear later today. Partnering with the community, certainly staying true to the role of community colleges where he spent decades working. But partnering with an underserved yet growing community, certainly an act of faith. And so this event, while just one of the many rich pieces of work and impact Bernie had that you will hear about today, for me epitomizes, and more importantly for many in our Latino community here in Mesa, what Bernie was about and what he stood for. It was his leadership at this radical inaugural event, convening several hundred community members into an annual event that is still being held today, still being supported by our school district, still being supported by our college. And I'm not sure many professional colleagues remember these roots, but our community does. Some of the more heartfelt tributes and words since his passing have not come from educated verse, or in Latin, or in democratic speak, but in humble words in Spanish from a very grateful community. And as Bernie would say, and I often heard him remark about himself this way, not a bad job for a gringo. This sense of justice and doing something for the greater good was embedded in so much of his work, and here in Mesa for sure. Championing our student public policy forum at the district level, certainly another great piece of his work. Realizing the importance of introducing our young people to policy and making sure that our spiffers, as we affectionately call them, are valued and had an enriching experience. Again, for me, this is rooted in his faith. The faith his family grounded him in, but also an incredible faith that he had in our community. Faith that involving community and citizens in discussions that impact their lives is the right thing to do. That decisions are best made with more people at the table rather than in a vacuum. And honestly, that list goes on and on. Such faith he had. So I will leave you with this wish today, that no matter our own personal backgrounds, the personal faiths that we come from, that we will adopt Bernie's great sense of faith in the greater good and in the power of our own communities. And that we will continue carrying out our work and our lives with a sense of humor and overriding faith. It's my honor to introduce Jim now to speak. Jim has been a great friend and a great community partner with Bernie for decades. I won't say how many and embarrass him. We were trying to take count earlier. So Jim, if you wouldn't mind coming forward.
It's my pleasure to be here and to honor this good guy. Look at that face. That smile, that eyes, those eyes, just his friendship. He is not only a colleague for me and to me, but a friend. And it's very interesting. I was talking to Mark just before. She said she hadn't been over to Mesa. And so you see Bernie this big life, and then there's two old Mesa Mormon dudes here that he associated with, and this bridge building quality that he had among people is wonderful, and is the fabric of his work, really, is what he's put together. So I put together a few thoughts and comments that I'd like to share with you about Bernie. I'm going to put on my specs here. The Bible says, to everything there's a season, a time to every purpose under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted. Well, this is a time to celebrate and remember our Bernie Ronan. As I heard from this, of his passing, there were the first thoughts that came to my mind. I wrote them down and I sent them to Pat Esparza, and I said that this is what I said: a good man, a great friend, a brilliant mind, a kind and thoughtful soul, a builder of the common good, eloquent in written and spoken language, respecter of all, tolerant and appreciative of all peoples and perspective, loving husband and father, and a citizen of the world. Those are the words that just came to me about Bernie. As I go on here, I want to, one of the things, I know you've already referenced it, but Bernie's love of learning and scholarship is phenomenal. I mean, he was probably a lot of the thoughts that many of us carried forward really started with Bernie. And it's wonderful that quality that he has and had. And I wanted, as I think of Bernie, I think of this eloquence with words, and this love of education. So I wanted to share with you something that I value and I've shared with him and that he values. I see Deb out there; she's seen this for 20 years, 30 years. It goes like this. It says, I am education, one of the great values that Bernie holds. I bear the torch that enlightens the world and fires the imagination of man, feels the flame of genius. I give wings to dreams and might to hand and brain. From out of these deep shadows of the past I come, wearing the scars of struggle and the stripes of toil, but bearing in triumph the wisdom of all ages. Man, because of me, holds dominion over earth, air, and sea. It is for him I leash the lightning, plumb the deep, and shackle the ether. I am the parent of progress, the creator of culture, the molder of destiny. Philosophy, science, and art are the works of my hand. I banish ignorance and discourage vice and disarm anarchy. Thus I have become freedom's citadel, the arm of democracy, the hope of youth, the pride of adolescence, the joy of age. Fortunate the nations and happy the homes that welcome me. The school, Bernie School, is my workshop. Here I stir ambitions and stimulate ideals, forge the keys that open the door to opportunity. I am the source of inspiration, the aid of aspiration. I am irresistible power. I am education. To me, that's Bernie. And his words, we would write stuff together. And I would have a thought, and he would put the magic to it with eloquence. as we try to develop things. I knew Bernie, I believe, for 35 or 40 years, to say to Deanna, that's about how long it was. We worked together, I don't remember exactly when, but we worked together on many things to build our communities. He was a student and a practitioner in civic engagement and social justice, as Deanna referenced. Now I'm going to share a few examples that we worked on together. One is the East Valley Think Tank. And that group was formed with Bernie and I and Larry Christensen, who was the former president here. And it was an attempt to bring together the East Valley people who worked in education across our community colleges, our universities, and our K-12 systems, and bring them into a collaboration so that we could work better together and form that. And that was in 1998. And he was a key element of making that happen and working with it. And I have been working it till these days now, in trying to help run that organization and go from there. And we're about to do a handoff of that organization back into the East Valley Partnership that Rock will talk about, which was one of the other big entities that he helped form, and Rock will give you the specifics on that. Another thing we worked on was the conversion of Williams Air Force Base during the BRAC Commission, when they were taking air bases and selling them or doing something with them. And Bernie and I, Laddie Core and others wrote a document to convert Williams Air Force Base into an educational mall, anchored by Arizona State University and Maricopa Community Colleges. And that work exists today, and you know it as ASU Poly, and the work that's out there. And so we worked with a large group of people over probably 18 months in trying to get that handoff done, and that was a lot of Bernie's work. So another area in which he was involved. His citizen participation forums that were mentioned earlier were always there. He always engaged in dialogue, always brought everyone into the dialogue to work for an outcome, whether it be with the groups that Deanna mentioned or groups in downtown Phoenix, in which I was engaged with him in civic engagement, or many others. And this was his spirit, and his collaboration was to do these things. He worked with Mayor Phil Gordon to help. You see what's going on in downtown Phoenix? Well, a large part of that was some of Bernie's dream, along with Mayor Gordon. And all the revitalization and the education elements that are downtown in Phoenix now were part of that. I remember going over and working with them on a variety of things, doing that. He helped me co-write, or we did co-write together, the original P20 document. This is it, all pretty colored and everything else. So here's the way it went. This P20 document was designed to help build a philosophical base and a mental architecture and a common vocabulary for bringing education together. We were very siloed at this time between early education, K-12 education, community colleges, and universities. And not that that problem will ever go fully away, but we developed a seamless pipeline, a mental architecture for that. We sold it to a then Governor Napolitano. We formed a P20 council. We then sold it to a second administration under Brewer, and had a group who worked to bring these elements together to make a more seamless pipeline, so that our students going through this pipeline would have more linkage in these institutions. And so this concept still is alive and well, and is the basis of work that goes on today. And we don't even know where it came from, this architecture and this vocabulary. This is where it came from. And Bernie was a co-author in that, and a primary author in that. We conceived of the concept here. Everybody was, as I said, quite siloed and in fighting each other, if you will. Business would trump education, education would trump business, as we tried to do education reform. So we conceived the concept of education stewards, and these are some of Bernie's words. And he defined stewards as careful and responsible managers of something entrusted to their care. That's what a steward was. This is classic Bernie. From his scholarship, from his Jesuit education to his professional and personal life, he stated, "Stewards are not ideologues with only one issue or one jurisdiction to protect. Rather, stewards are committed to the long-term well-being of place. Stewards are leaders who cross boundaries and build coalitions for sustained action. Stewards are people who have a 360-degree vision, recognizing the interdependence between education, business, economy, and social equity." And so that was what came through in this kind of thinking. Bernie could talk about anything. He could talk about religion, philosophy, sports, TV, and he's a foodie. He was a friend to all and a champion of his family and their activities and their successes. I would hear, you can't know how much I heard about your children and all of his nieces and nephews as well. And when he was championing, he loved this whole big clan. As interim president of Mesa Community College, I remember he called me down. We went to the office right over there, and I remember him pondering at his desk about the right thing to do for a program and its people. There was discord, and there was something that had a difficult decision to be made, and it weighed on him. And I'm not sure he liked the executive position as much as the role of advisor and the role of just wise old dude that he could offer that perspective that he has on so many things. So Bernie was an old soul, and he came with, it seemed to me he came with that wisdom when I first met him as a young man. So I want to end with this because to me it embodies Bernie and this phrase I know he loved. This is a phrase from Alfred Lord Tennyson, and it comes to my mind about Bernie and his strength and his honor. And it goes like this: though much is taken, much abides, and though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are, we are. One equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Bernie's life's work, thought, and integrity lives through us all, his family, friends, and colleagues. Thank you. Deanna? Okay, I'm going to introduce Rock.
The man needs no introduction.
This man needs to, this is Rock Arnett. And he was the first student at Mesa, I won't take it, you can say this? Okay, first student at Mesa Community College and president, and a great leader in the community, a great friend of Bernie's, and they worked together on building the East Valley Partnership into a wonderful organization. So Rock has some great memories to share.
Jim, please don't stop. I'm reminded, I once heard Walter Cronkite introduced to a group, and there was a long introduction, and they gave all of his accolades, and they started by saying this man needs no introduction, and Mr. Cronkite got up and said, I love introduction. So thank you, and what an honor it is for me to be here to join all of you to honor a friend and colleague, Bernie Ronan. And Myra, welcome. I need to say to you and the brothers and the sister that's here, welcome to Zion. This is where Bernie lived and worked and played and had a good time and has done so many great things. It's apropos that we are here in this library and reflect on some of the books and thinking and ideals and values that guided Bernie's way of providing leadership. And his leadership was absolutely unique. You notice in the program that the leadership challenge is mentioned by the authors Koussis, I think if I've said that right, and Posner, and they start from the premise that makes the statement that leadership is not about personality. It's about behavior and an observable set of abilities. I read the Cliff Notes of the Leadership Challenge, and I soon discovered that the fundamental practices of a good leader, I think they were talking about Bernie. Without knowing Bernie, they described Bernie and his leadership while at his best, and they followed these 5 principles and practices: model the way, inspire a shared vision, challenge the process, enable others to act, but last but not least, encourage the heart. And so let me give you a couple of ideas that follow in this education setting. And I don't know how much he was involved, but I would say, right at the side of Larry Christensen, he helped build this campus. And what a great campus it is, what a great asset to this community. So, when Bernie became the interim president of the community college here, he certainly modeled the way. He established principles concerning the way people should be treated, the way goals should be pursued, and during his several months tenure, he was able to unravel bureaucracy, which I understand continues, I could say that, and inspire and create opportunities for victory and success. As Jim has mentioned, Bernie was certainly part of the Inspire a Shared Vision, particularly the Williams Gateway area, that has now become the thriving and important Phoenix Mesa Gateway Airport, the educational complex, and the industrial area of the Phoenix East Valley. I believe Bernie's passion for the reuse of the Gateway Airport has made a difference that will pay dividends to this community for generations. He and his colleagues, Jim and others, and one that was not mentioned is Mark Killian, who helped with the legislation making available the authority for the Gateway Airport and the reuse of that. And it was Bernie who helped craft and make possible the Gateway to blossom as it is. I've personally been a beneficiary of that Gateway area. We did a lot of studies on the Gateway area, and I think yet to come will be a great and continue to be great. As a quiet leader, Bernie and his colleagues were able to change and positively challenge the process in education leaders as they search for opportunities to change the status quo. He worked to establish and innovate many activities, as Jim has mentioned, like the East Valley Think Tank, certainly the East Valley Partnership. He was an integral part of that from the time that I was there for the 13 years. And the Community Roundtable, and I'm sure that there are many projects and agendas and programs that have been in Maricopa system that Bernie has had his finger and helped collaborate. Bernie enabled others to act and fostered collaboration. He was a master of collaboration in my mind, and he built teams that would work together. Without naming names, I'm sure that there are many throughout the Maricopa complex and indeed the valley that have been touched by Bernie and he's crafting the group to create an atmosphere of trust and feeling of human dignity. He had a special way of strengthening others and making each person feel capable and empowered. He certainly did that with me, and I'm sure with many of you. And finally, Bernie had a way of encouraging the heart, made people feel like they were heroes in his eyes. I never had a meeting with him without feeling, man, this guy is okay, he likes me. I consider him to be one of the closest advisors that I had during my time at the East Valley Partnership. There were many times that Bernie and I would break bread over T.C. Eggington's. I think we should have bought stock. But what really happened, Bernie gave me sage advice, and that sage advice came through his education, perhaps his study of the priesthood, because we talked about things spiritual many times, his genuine love for his fellow men, and his vision to keep hope and determination alive. He expected ordinary people to do extraordinary things, and then he would help celebrate those ordinary things that were celebrated, that were accomplished. Because of Bernie and Larry and others, the East Valley Partnership continues to meet in this building down in the community room once a month, and we've done it for many years. I think it was from the very first time it was built. Now, on a personal note, 6 months ago, Mike Hutchinson and I took Bernie to lunch at the fish market in Camelback. Bernie had lost some weight, and he wasn't the same old Bernie that we remembered because of his illness. But I had the opportunity to give thanks and appreciation to Bernie for his great mentorship to me and to the partnership and to others over the years. I wish to thank the family for letting us associate with Bernie and know of the personal appreciation for what he has done for me, for what he's done for the East Valley Partnership, and indeed the Phoenix East Valley. May God bless the memory of Bernie Ronan. Thank you.
So I'll steal Bernie's words here. Not too bad for a couple of Mesa Mormons, right? I think he would be quite proud. I'd like to now invite Ryan Murphy forward, a great friend and colleague of Bernie's here most recently with some work around civic engagement and democracy, and actually a co-author of a number of pieces. So Ryan, all the way from Florida, come share his thoughts for us.
It's actually California, but
Sorry, Ryan.
tropical. I don't know what to call it. It's an odd experience to hear of this very local work and to hear the resonance of this voice and these eyes and the smile in your local context, because I came to meet and know Bernie in an entirely different context, with a set of issues very similar, but in an entirely different environment. And yet to hear the memory of the particular relationships that you had and the relationships that I heard about at the Mass, I was thinking earlier, and I was saying to Eddie and Jenna, that wonderful image, just that spectacular image of Bernie in the patio at the Celestial Library, arguing with Augustine and Dorothy Day. Well, if others have been channeling Augustine, I think I'm channeling Dorothy Day. I met Bernie in the national context of the founding of something called the Democracy Commitment, which Bernie and a few others helped scheme up in the face of a national narrative that tended to marginalize community college students and to not think of them as active participants in the civic world. And he who was the champion of partnerships and community here spoke in several national environments, meetings, conferences, that if you neglect half of America's undergraduates who are enrolled in the community colleges, you do so at your peril, because they really represent the country's future, specifically and concretely the diversity of its future. And so this man from this space, with that experience in these communities, became for us a colleague in the founding of a national movement in the community colleges, which began over coffee and bad donuts in 2 Washington meetings, and grew from a couple of phone calls to an initial 38 college districts that met in New York to create this document called the Democracy Commitment, and then grow the movement, which now has 230 colleges with a modest enrollment of 3.4 million students. Not bad for a local guy also working in your community. So my memory of Bernie is as a very serious strategic thinker, who was somebody who thought with us, where ought we go and where should we meet and who should we bring to the table? So Eduardo Padron in Miami, and Rufus here, and Gail Mello at LaGuardia, and Mary Spilday at Lane. These are all colleges and spaces in the United States whose leadership was needed to build a national movement, and Bernie knew who they were and knew how to pick up the phone and call them and organize them. And so the meetings that you're describing locally were then duplicated, if you will, in the creation of a national conversation about the future of not just America's community colleges, but America's communities within which our colleges live and work. So at a kind of that level, if you will, what I met was a guy who could in fact quote Augustine and talk about neighborhood organizing. That's pretty rare, right? And by quirk of accident, we were talking about this, it paralleled certain of my odd educational experience. He was the only person in 45 years who knew who Francisco Suarez was. And, you know, so we had the most obscure conversation that one could possibly have about the role of volunteerism in the founding of the notion of Socrates. Who knew? Unbelievable. And then from that to, okay, we need to list the states in which the marginal voting patterns would be affected by the engagement of community college students across the following lines. And then we're going to build a partnership with Fair Elections Legal Network because, in fact, that the voting turnout for Latinos changes in New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, Texas, Florida, and North Carolina, game over in national elections. He, too, could think about that, and did. So for me, it was an astonishing opportunity to talk with somebody who was very grounded in these deeply serious values. When you speak of his faith, you're talking about a set of human commitments, a certain view of the human family that was on the one hand a projection of yours, a projection of the partnership, of the love, of the affection. What would it actually be like if men and women could reach across the divisions of race and class and language and immigration status and be together in a space where they could genuinely use the words loving community and be serious? What would that look like? How would that feel? And so he was our partner in the building of this movement at the national level that had at its heart this deeply personal view. It was not this big abstract thing. There should be programs in civic education and model curricula and best practices. I never heard him use the word best practice. He talked about the way people should talk with each other and how they ought to meet with each other. So it is partly because of an astonishing conversation between Edmundo Norte and my shop, who's a friend and colleague, and Bernie, that every meeting of the Democracy Committee, we're talking several hundred people, right? Every meeting begins with a conocimiento, where people sit and meet each other and say, what's your story? Who are you? Why are you here? What brings you to this place? And only after you do that do you talk about programs and curricula and budgets. And I swear to you, I have never been in meetings that are ever as good as those that have begun in that deeply personal way. That thing that people are slightly embarrassed to do, because who'd want to really share that with a stranger? It's amazingly how cool it is. Bernie, brave soul, modeled it, did it, was into it. Edmundo turned to me and said, who is that guy? There's once a priest. And he said, what? The priests I remember, that's a separate Finally, I want to say something directly about this linkage between mind and heart that people have talked about. Bernie was, for us at the national level, he was the architect of several projects. And again, it's interesting to hear the sort of local version of it, of you guys working day by day, right? He was the person who put together the National Endowment for the Humanities Bridging Cultures Grant. He's the one who landed for community colleges a series of other funding streams. He was at that level, if you will, quite practical. We needed money to get things done. He knew how to help us get the money. But they were never about the money, they were about the projects. And the heart of the project was the constant search for space where people could talk to each other about the toughest things in this culture. His view of it was at this height down to right here. This country becomes majority non-white in 2042. Sometime mid-March. 15th. They said, Mundo says, party at my house, people. 52% of the children in California's K-12 are Latino. 52%. This country is rapidly changing. Bernie knew it, thought about it. He missed most of the drama of the last several months when the country twitches, becomes frightened, reacts. He was profoundly committed to the idea that the only way we would move into an ethical, serious future was if we learned how to talk to each other. And so he was constantly looking for models of conversation, dialogue, movement, action that would bring people together across the boundaries of race and language and immigration status and class. So that moral image that persons of difference share the world and are going to build a beloved community, or we will collapse, was profoundly at the center of what I would call his politics. This profoundly moral view of what it meant to live in a community of difference and see in it a family. And that is a profound image that taught me and taught a lot of us why we're in this world. So I'm profoundly indebted to him, to you, and to your family for what you gave to us. Thank you.
I'm not sure how I drew the short straw in following Brian Murphy, but that's okay, I'll do my best. Hi everybody. Hi. My name is Eddie Jenna, and I'm honored to be here with you all today to celebrate the life of our friend and colleague, Bernie Ronan. I did not have the pleasure to know Bernie as long as many of you in this room did. In fact, Bernie and I only really got to know each other well in the last about 3 years when I went from the faculty at Phoenix College to spend some time in the system office on a special assignment with the chancellor. But it was during that time where I got to know Bernie very well. And many of my remarks today, which I'll try to keep brief, are very personal in that way. I don't know I've learned a lot about Bernie today in terms of the arc of his life. But my remarks are very localized to what I've experienced with Bernie. And I'm going to take a few minutes to share that with you. One of the ways in which Bernie and I connected immediately, like when we were just ships passing in the night and we didn't really know each other that well, was our love of philosophy. I'm a philosophy professor. And we would steal guilty moments talking about Aristotle in the middle of the workday sometimes. And I always enjoyed that very much. What I wanted to do, and also in part today, is talk about the last work that he published. And as the concluding speaker, I wanted to make sure that fit in. Bernie published a work called The Love of the World, which just came out in a peer-reviewed journal during the period of his illness. And in it, I think if you read it carefully, that philosophy that he lays out sums up the way in which Bernie really did live his own life and the way he encouraged all of us to live. So let me talk about that briefly first. In that article, Bernie expanded on what he called the civic spectrum, a paradigm that he published about in a previous work. He focused in particular on the need to have all parts of that spectrum, the head, the heart, and the hand, working in concert for the betterment of the individual and the community. This article is a call to action, counseling us that we must equip our students and each other with each of these necessary civic skills so that they may navigate our often contentious and disconnected modern world and leave their own mark, or as Bernie has written elsewhere, their own crease on our collective endeavors. This triad, the head, the heart, and the hand, came naturally to Bernie in his own life and work to the benefit of all of us. The head, as you may know, is the source of knowledge. But in particular, Bernie was not referring to theoretical knowledge, but the more practical wisdom of how the world works. I know that in my personal experience, I turn to Bernie with regularity as a source of advice and wisdom many times. And I'm grateful that he was willing to share this savvy with me and with others. The heart is the feeling of community, the desire to connect with others and to make together more than we could make alone. Bernie exemplified his heart throughout all of his works, as you've heard from so many people today. Even after his retirement, as he was undergoing difficult and exhausting medical treatment, Bernie was always keeping an eye on caring about us, all the folks in the division, many folks in Maricopa with which I was in contact, calling and writing to check and see if we needed his help. I had several opportunities to sit down with Bernie during that time, to catch up with him on the comings and goings and doings of Maricopa, and his love of his work and his colleagues always shone through in those interactions. Actually, I remember one of the ways we used to schedule these meetings is we would sneak in a breakfast before a meeting that I'd have on the west side, and we would just sort of meet in a hotel lobby. We were meeting for breakfast for a time, but he didn't have an appetite, so we would just meet in the lobby, and that was always a pleasure. In a time and in circumstances when many people would think only of themselves, Bernie was always thinking of others. And last but most important, the hand. Bernie's writing and his own endeavors were a call to action. It's not enough to know things, be they academic concepts or practical strategies, or even enough to care, though Bernie did both in great measure. Only when the wisdom of the head and the passion of the heart come together to motivate the moving of the hand, the doing of meaningful work tied to a civic purpose, Bernie tells us, are we truly fulfilling our civic potential. And Bernie's work surrounds us. In the establishment of the democracy commitment, bringing together colleges from around the country to work together to instill civic skills in students, to the generations of the Student Public Policy Forum graduates who have gone on to further education and public service. Bernie's continual willingness to translate ideas and commitment into concrete action should inspire us all to follow in that example, to be the kind of citizens he was and wanted us all to be. I'm grateful to have had Bernie as a friend and a mentor, and I thank all of you today for being here to celebrate his memory together as a community. Thank you.
Bernie knew full well no celebration is complete without some frivolity and some food. So I now invite you to share your memories, stay with us, talk about our beloved friend and colleague. I do have a couple of requests. Please eat. Please make yourselves at home. Please make yourselves comfortable. We did try to get some albóndigas, but it's from Chartwell's, not Los Pinos, so you're on your own with that one. We do have some cards out from, we would encourage you to write down your memories so that we can give to the family. And Emily, our videographer, will be set up outside here if you'd like to share something, so again, we can share it with the family. Thank you for being here. Thank you, family, for sharing Bernie with us. Thank you, colleagues, for remembering him well. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Brian Dilley. I teach political science at Mesa Community College, and I worked with Bernie for a long time. He would be missed. Bernie and I worked with him for the civic engagement stuff, and was an advisor for the Student Public Policy Forum to help make that work. I like to say that Bernie and I had a mutually exploited relationship. Anytime he needed a faculty member to give the veneer of legitimacy over some scheme that he had, he would give me a call, and I was always game to help Bernie out. And so I would be the token faculty member to help him get things done that he needed to be done. And then anytime I needed something done, I needed some resources or some assistance, I would give him a call. And as long as I could explain how this helped students, he was always ready to move heaven and earth to make it happen. And so I used him, he used me, and it was a great working relationship. I'll miss him tremendously, and the leadership that he's providing creates a vacuum that we're going to have to really struggle to fill. So thank you for sharing him with us.